great to see you again. Placemaking, the buzzword of the moment. So hopefully by the end of this session we'll have a better understanding of what it really means and why it's important. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. To my immediate right, we've got Gaston Gayton, Chief Executive of the Leisure Way. Now, you and your team come up with the ideas, the design and oversee of development of leisure schemes. Looking at the pictures on your website, you've got schemes from as far afield as Russia, Singapore, Spain, so it's really great to have you here and your international perspective. To my left, Cameron Nash, another retail veteran with a focus on London. He's Chief Executive of Nash Bond, the retail property practice, and that includes advising some of the big London estates and also significant experience in leasing. But first, we're going to listen to a short presentation by James Child, Head of Retail Research at EG. So he's kindly going to give us a readout of the current retail environment, the backdrop to what we're going to be talking about. So over to you, James.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Emma. My name is James Child. I'm Head of Retail Research at EG. And to introduce this session on placemaking, I'm going to give a brief overview on where occupiers have been moving to and why. So looking at some of the data behind what's driving those occupiers to move to new and different locations, and what that means for consumers in terms of placemaking and indeed the creation of new and exciting environments. So quickly, on the agenda, I'll have a look at some of the latest news and content that we've been looking at EG. Then I'll look at some of the data, so looking at retail take-up stats and looking at those specific occupier sectors. Then looking at some of the whys, looking at some of the trends that have been emerging that we've seen and what that means for the creation of new places as well. And then I'll try and wrap it up with some conclusions at the end. So quite a lot to try and get through in a 10-minute period. So first up, back in January, we actually reported that a diverse F&B offer is actually ranked as the most important aspect for a desirable retail experience amongst younger people or millennials. That, of course, has had a knock-on effect in terms of the refurbishment and regeneration of schemes and town centres up and down the country. As we know, food and beverage to retail ratio is its largest that it's ever been. So consumers clearly driving that need and want for change, and indeed the new shape of retail and leisure development. So we can see clearly how occupiers, or consumers rather, are actually really driving that necessary change. Next up, I'm going to have a look at a couple of market indicators we've seen so far this year. Retail take-up has actually dropped off by around 11% year on year in overall square footage terms. And that is actually symptomatic of the entire commercial real estate at the moment. So we know that London offices have dropped off around 12% as well, and those key regional cities' office take-up has dropped by 13%. And even the industrial sector, which we know has been largely resilient over the past 18 months, has also dropped by 7%. So it's not just retail that's really suffered post-Brexit. Moving on then, let's have a look at those sectors that I mentioned. This chart indicates deals share, so deals count year on year, 2016 in the blue and 2017 in the orange. And what you can see there, obviously, on your right-hand side is F&B. F&B has actually jumped up from 25% up to 27% year on year, helped by the expansion activity of several national chains, and some of those you can see on the screen. Now, they've actually been making the move into different areas, so moving from their traditional heartlands into out-of-town spaces and retail parks, which is something I'll touch on in a moment. Now, despite the continued rise of food and beverage, questions have been raised about if we are reaching a natural saturation point in the sector. And this report from Cushman & Wakefield, which is probably the best reading out there if you're interested, looking at how sustainable that growth really is, especially within the economic climate that what consumers find themselves in. And indeed, our data clearly reflects that as well. So there has been a gradual slowdown in that F&B deal share year on year. Perhaps the litmus test will come in 2018 if we see that line really level out or perhaps even dip off or dip away. So that's F&B in a nutshell. Let's have a look at some of the other sectors of what's been going on there. Health and beauty has been doing really well as well. It's jumped up from 13 to 15% year on year. Interestingly, in this sector, online sales only account for around 4.5% of the total sales. Now, the average across all sectors is something around 14 to 15%. So it gives you an indication that people are actually very much still interested in going to these stores and touching and feeling before they buy. So resilient from that, or more resilient from that online spend. Some of the other sectors that perhaps haven't performed so well, fashion being one of them, after consecutive years of quite intense expansion, has now dropped away slightly. It's actually had its worst sales for a July period since 2009, down 3.5% as consumers look to go and purchase or shift their attention to essential goods. And value as well. After intense brand expansion over the past 3, 4, 5 years, that's also slowing down. That despite B&M going in and buying Heron Group earlier on this year, administrations have also hindered the sector too. So 99p stores has affected the Poundland portfolio as well. So that's just some of the musings we've seen with those sectors. How about where they're actually going to then? Well, again, let's have a look at retail deal share by location, and I've bunched it up into those traditional sectors we all know, and looking at the percentage of those deals per year. The high street, unsurprisingly, coming up at around 50% for all those years, and now we have retail parks and shopping centres. Now, at first glance, it doesn't really appear that there's too much going on until we focus in on the final 3 years. And we find that the high street has dropped from 56% down to 50%. Simultaneously, that retail park share has jumped up from 15 to 19. And that is really indicative of the trend that we've seen over the past 2, 3 years, retailers moving from those central locations to those out-of-town areas. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of areas where we've seen striking evidence of that in action. First up on the high street, these are the retailers that we all know who've gone into administration over the past 18 months or so. At EG, we actually looked at the data behind it. We found that portfolio consists of around 8.5 million square foot of space. And of that space, only 43% of it has actually been re-let to new tenants. So an awful lot of that space is still lying vacant and with no plans for the future as well. Of that 8.5 million square foot, around 85% of that is located in town centres. So that gives you an idea of the amount of empty space that we're looking at. And that's all coming at a time when there's been a real desire and intent for brand new planning applications for out of town. This chart indicates anything which we determine as a new scheme, which is over 50,000 square foot. The headline here is up 60% year on year, and it's at a 10-year high. So you can see that blue line has been trending upwards since 2010 against the orange line for town centres, which has really faded away. So it's quite a lot of numbers there and a lot of graphs, so I appreciate that, but it really does spell out an interesting picture. We know then that there has undeniably been a swing towards out-of-town locations. That despite attempts to future-proof by the MPPF and Town Centre First policy, which was all the way back in March 2012. So on the face of it, it doesn't really look like that's worked. In fact, it's going the other way. We've seen take-up up from 15 to 19%, planning applications up 60% as well. So what's been driving this intent then? Well, we know that consumers are still happy to travel to out-of-town locations. As for them, convenience is key, and that's probably the biggest theme that I draw from this session. Convenience is still key for consumers. We've already seen that retailers follow consumers. Retailers are willing to adapt and change, especially with their central portfolios in those town centre areas, and to move to bigger stores for cheaper rent. But in terms of the session today and placemaking, what does this actually mean? Well, in order to secure those central locations, perhaps decision makers need to do more to bring people back into the fold and really bring people back into those central areas, which of course is all very well and good, but how do we go about that? Well, We have seen a couple of examples over the past 6 months or so. First of all, this article from the EG back in April, a third of all shopping centres in London have redevelopment plans, and all of those redevelopment plans include a residential element. So, bringing people back as opposed to people commuting in and then commuting out again. And it's the same in Manchester as well. It's not only London. Manchester's really benefited from the nightlife and really fueling that return to city centre living. So again, it's about live, work and play, and it's not all about just working 9 to 5 and then going home and commuting out. So I think that's really an area where those decision makers, those councils, developers need to begin to think about what they can do. So that's all from me. I'm due to hand back to the panel now. That wasn't all of the data. There is, of course, a plethora more of, of workings behind that. If you are interested in what you've heard or a bit about what we do at EG, do come and find me after the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. So now we're going to hear from Gaston, who's going to give us a bit of a case study on the sort of scheme that he does, with lots of all the juicy details, please.
Okay. I will not probably show you too many figures today, but I will tell you a story. 20 years ago, I just bumped into a shopping center for the first time. I was running a family business related to leisure, and I got into trouble. I really got into trouble. We were running an operation that was making losses, and we felt really bad. So after this situation, our question was, what is the problem? Is what we are doing wrong, or is the shopping center not adapting to us? None of that was correct. In reality, what I detected, that life was not in our place, was in another place in the mall. So this was us trying to be in one location, trying to be probably in the worst location, downstairs or upstairs, outside or inside. This problem, in reality, brought an opportunity to really think forward how we're going to think out of the box. And we really thought that thinking out of the box, we have to take it literally, think of the box, and bring leisure in a completely different way, to really start to bring the leisure into the life and create different layers, so it's not only a place where you're going to be a destination, but really part of the everyday life. Understanding that today's are changing, our habits are changing. You know, there is a lot of innovation in technology, and there is a lot of situations where people are not willing to go out of their homes. We need to really start to provide very, very good reasons for them to go to a shopping center. And so our proposition is to really start to think of creation a much more friendly environment, more human, sustainable environment where people are going to connect. And we're going to talk about emotions. And this is an important fact that probably we cannot put in so many charts. More than 80% of our decisions are taken with the emotional side of the brain, not with the rational side of the brain. Taking this in consideration, we have to understand that customers like to go to leisure ecosystems. And I will explain a little bit more about what is a leisure ecosystem. We need to start to establish an emotional connection. And we need to understand that your tenants like to go where your customers like to go. So this idea of creating emotional-driven customer journeys is back to understanding that our decisions are based on the rational, on the emotional side, being a slave for all these situations. So we need to start to create the stories for them. This is some of the understanding how we can bring the leisure culture into the mall, not just understanding in one place, but integrating the leisure into a different state of mind, bringing the people not just in an activity, but making people feel good. This is the end what we need to do. If we want to make a human connection, it's not about buying out of the shelf a particular activity. It's thinking from every part, every layer of the mall, how we're going to connect, how we're going to create that emotional connection. Of course, this brings benefits to your clients, to your visitors, and what we say now to inhabitants, because your shopping centers are not people, they are not places that people just visit. People leave your centers. So what we propose at the leisure way is to really think leisure as the part that is the glue, the social glue of all the parts. You know, you are doing a lot of efforts in the tenants are doing a lot of efforts in the extra experience. There is a lot of efforts in the omni-channels, and we believe that leisure thinking could be the glue of all these parts. I just want to show you a few examples, case studies. This is a project in Russia where we found actually a big shopping center who was extending, almost double. And the big question here was how we're going to attract people, because it was on the other side of the river. The city was, and the life was on the other side, but the new developments were crossing the river. So we really understood that the city, the new city that has been built, was full of flats, but there was not life. There was not a city life. So we really started to design a concept called mini city, where we are attracting and developing different neighborhoods, as you see, creating different attractions and different venues to cater the families, to cater those couples that they want to go at night, for those group of friends, for the kids. So this understanding of complete integration of leisure, food and beverages, and retail really is the new version that we are approaching in our projects. This is another project. This is in Vienna, and called by the CEO, before we intervene, the most miserable gallery at the whole portfolio. And basically, he wanted to create life. And there was a big problem here, because they wanted to bring people from one side of the mall to the other. Basically, people were attending malls. So we had to create an element so attractive, so visible, for the people to be seen far away and to be able to go to the end of the gallery. And really, we proposed what we call the green corridor with a wow effect at the end, where we create a tree, the synthesis of a tree with activities and bringing landscape in. And of course, this was a complete success. This item alone is bringing 45,000 kids a month, more than the cinema, which far less investment. And of course, the outcome of this is not only the 45,000 kids, it's that the mothers are buying. This is the new gathering point for the family, and sales around grew almost 30%. This is another project where we have using the leisure as a welcome zone and also as a connector between a shopping center and another mall. We believe that shopping centers are enclosed, and we need to start to open them to the views of the people. And also we have to start to create those sense of place in the different gatherings. In this case, we played, since this is in the Algarve, we play with the nature of the Algarve landscape, and we played using what is the main advantage of Algarve, the weather. So actually this space, the idea is to really to have a welcome area and a fluid connection and an oasis between the two sites. This oasis, of course, by the way, is opening next week. This is another project in Lisbon where it's not that big. It's an empty square. And basically the asset manager in that case said, please, Gaston, we need to do something with this square. This is, empty and it's deserted. Nobody wants to go here. So they are doing a complete redevelopment of the mall. And the whole story about the mall is that they are creating some sort of a village feeling. And we thought that the village feeling is fine, but we needed to bring some cultural effect, some sculptural effect. So we studied, and we detected that the biggest problem of this square is that basically the mothers were not taking the kids there because the sun was hitting so hard that basically the kids were frying. So we started from the problem and said, okay, how are we going to solve and creating a shading area that solves the problem of the play area and also bringing some sort of element that be a visual connection and like a sculpture in the middle of the city. So this was the end result. An element that is quite urban, that serves not only the families, but also, as you can see, the design also can be used for events, as a stage, some of the programs. So all of our intention is to really start to think how we're going to create your shopping centers into a third place. I will review quickly some of the other projects that we are involved, and I will put you a video that can show some of our work. I think we can put it now in the video. So at the Leisure Way, we really think that each project is unique. We need to study, we need to research, we need to work together to be innovative, to be disruptive. And of course, the understanding of the leisure into the mall is not just getting off the shelf an element, it's really to perform a leisure strategy that caters all the layers and integrates correctly the DNA, the leisure DNA, into the retail system. So I suggest that to start using our leisure thinking, the whole of us, to try to be disruptive, innovative, and bring the new shopping centers that all of us are questioning for the future. That's it.